Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Caridad. I'm one of the VPs of mentorship this year. I'm going to be hosting the TWM for Pathway to Grad School. So this is just going to be like a general overview of what you should be doing to if you're interested in applying to grad school and like a basic timeline. And we have a couple of our panelists here. If you'd all like to introduce selves. Hello.
Okay, I can start. Um, so my name is Delias Bio. I'm a clinical social worker working with UCSF psychiatry. And for grad school, since that's the theme of today's workshop, I attended a CSU East Bay, did their MSW program with the concentration in children, youth, and families.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Villegas. I'm Cari's brother, and I'm a child welfare worker, so a different kind of social worker than Delia. I primarily work at Alameda County in the Department of Children and Family Services. It's based in Hayward, California. Or at least my station is based in Hayward, California. We also have a location in Oakland. And I graduated this spring, 2019, from UC Berkeley's Master of Social Welfare program. And so I also have my MSW. Yeah, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have today.
Thank you.
All right, and I'm Eric, and I am a dual degree. I'm in the dual degree program here at Johns Hopkins. I'm doing a master's in public health and a master's in business administration. My focus is on the prevention and management of chronic illnesses, and specifically, I'm working on creating the healthcare infrastructure to accommodate a change in the current system so that we can, help patients better manage and prevent these diseases from arising.
Awesome. Thank you so much to all of you guys. People who are listening to this later on or now, I decided to bring in people who are not your average like doctor or PA or any health professional. I thought that we should bring in different aspects of the healthcare system. So we have people who are focusing more on mental health and the actual like infrastructure of healthcare and things like that. That's what I really wanted to bring out in this TWM. Here are the next slide. We will talk about the goals of this webinar. And so by the end of this, I'm hoping that you have a clear concept of what is needed to pursue any graduate program. So just recognizing the materials that will be required of you to actually apply and what the general application will look like. Obviously, it will be different for each school and program that you apply to, but at least you can have a good idea of what a typical application would look like. By having these different people here, I want you to hear these stories and understand that everyone has a different path and there isn't a right route on whatever you decide to take. And of course, just being able to network and ask questions to people who are already in these positions that you would maybe one day hope to be in. Okay, so we're just going to start off with the general requirements for most programs. Most is an asterisk because, I mean, like I said earlier, every program is different and they require different things. The main things are you're going to need to send in your transcripts. So these are going to have to be official. You're going to have to take the GRE for the majority of programs. Obviously, it depends. And for each program, there's going to be a different maybe cutoff or minimum that they're going to be looking for. But that shouldn't like deter you from applying if this is not something that you're like necessarily fond of doing, like standardized testing. Letters of recommendation are usually required. Sometimes they'll ask for specific professional or academic letters of recommendation, and typically they ask for 3. You should have a resume or a CV ready for whatever application you decide to do. And also most of them also require a statement of purpose of some sort, whether it be a personal statement or you explaining why and how you differ from everybody else and what makes you stand out in that program. So a typical timeline, I built this thinking of just like the way that most people, I think, would go into like any graduate program, the first thing that you'd want to do is build a list of schools that you are interested in going to. And so usually you can make this like on Excel or Google Sheets. And you're going to want to include some safety schools, some reach schools, and some target schools. You're never really going to know what the school is looking for, no matter like what it says online. So even if your dream is to go to Harvard or something like that, we would suggest you applying, because you never, like I said, you never know what they're going to look for, and let them be the ones to tell you no if that's the case. Don't psych yourself out of that. So when you're also building this list, you're going to want to look into special notes about each program. So you want to look into the research interests that they may have. Some faculty might have a specific thing that you want to do research in. So really look into that, look into accreditation, because some opportunities do arise, like in terms of internships and things like that, that may require your school to be accredited or your program to be accredited. You also want to be able to talk to students who are already in the program or who have done the program, so at least you have a good idea of what the day-to-day life looks like for a student there. You also want to be thinking about who your potential network is going to be. So let's say you're applying for a school in Georgia and you know that you're interested in diseases. You should know that the CDC is around there, so you're going to have a good idea. You're going to have a good amount of opportunities to go and do some sort of research or internship at the CDC, and if that's something you're interested in. And then I would highly just like advise doing anything just because of the prestige of a name or a program. If that isn't something that you're interested in, don't apply there. That is just, at the end of the day, not what you want to be doing when you're looking for the schools that you are potentially going to be applying to. So then the next part is probably you're going to start planning on taking the GRE. So you're going to have to study. The average amount of time people do take to study is 3 to 4 months. And so you really do want to plan appropriately and think about your other commitments. Obviously, people study differently. So really just base this on your own lifestyle, your own study habits and things like that. But you should know that the earlier you sign up, the cheaper it is. And there's always prep courses and practice tests online for you to take. And there's apps that will help you practice like vocabulary words, like math problems of the day. So really just keep that in mind as well when you're trying to figure out when to take the test. So you're going to have to request official transcripts from your school, like no matter where you're from. And usually no matter what program you're going to be applying to, they're going to ask for this. So just be aware that it does take a couple of weeks for this to happen, and you are usually going to have to pay between $5 and $10. So just be aware of that cost if this is going to be something that might deter you from applying. And if you can't afford that for whatever reason, always ask your financial aid office and ask your registrar if there's any way for you to get like some sort of waiver for that as well. So asking for letters of recommendation is actually going to be one of our main questions that we're going to go through today, because it probably is the most anxiety-inducing part of applying for any sort of program. And so I just want you all to know to be professional about it, but also you need to be firm with these professors and faculty people and just like anyone you're asking, because people have busy lives and they might forget when something is due. And so you don't want them to be procrastinating on your letter of rec when it could actually be like such a huge part of your application. So like I said, be professional, but also just be on top of the deadlines as well. One thing that you should really do when you are asking for a letter of recommendation is be upfront about what you want them to talk about in your letter. So if you want them to highlight a leadership opportunity, like your leadership experience, let them know, like, I would really appreciate for you to do this, but also I have not asked for a letter of recommendation. So definitely we can have our speakers and panelists talk about like how to appropriately highlight what you want them to speak about in your letter of rec. So writing your statement of purpose or your personal statement is another huge aspect. And of course, this is what really will set you apart from a lot of other people, because you actually get to share your story and talk about your journey. So definitely just find an advisor or somebody you trust to help you and read through the statement. Just get ready for some criticism, and just be prepared to really get down and figure things out together and just showcase how what value you're gonna bring to the program of your choice and how you stand out from everybody else. And then also, like I said earlier, you're gonna want to have a resume or CV ready to go. And I would just advise finding somebody that you trust to look over everything. And if you have resources on any college campus nearby, usually you can just schedule an appointment and have someone objectively look at it. So at UC Davis, we have the Internship and Career Center. And so if that is something that you'd be interested in doing, just having someone just like fresh eyes look at it, that would be a really great idea for you to do. So now we're going to move into the panel, and we do have some preset questions for everybody to answer. We can go into everybody. I know we introduced ourselves really briefly at the beginning, but if we can just go through again and just get a more in-depth bio about everybody. I think the first one is Delia. So here's Delia's bio. If you want to go in a little bit deeper about this, Delia, before we begin the panel section, you can go ahead and add anything you want to.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so basically my bio just talks a little bit about my school background and my work history. So I'll just kind of go through that really quickly. So my undergraduate degree was in politics with a focus in political theory from UC Santa Cruz. I took through 3 years after completing my undergraduate degree before starting grad school, and got my degree, my MSW from CSU East Bay, which I really, really enjoyed that program, and I'm really excited to be on the panel as someone who did a master's program at a Cal State, so I'm really excited to talk about that a little bit more. You know, the process of applying to grad school, finding what it was that I even wanted to study was definitely not an easy one, but I will say that all of the fears I had, I ended up realizing were mostly in my head. So hopefully, you know, folks can walk away from today's workshop just really empowered, knowing that asking for those letter of rec, the hardest part is sending that email. And anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm really excited to be here. And a lot of the work that I do now is around mental health, decolonizing mental health, and also looking at imposter phenomenon and the way that that shows up in our work and in our communities. And I work with severely acute individuals who are the highest utilizers of emergency mental health services in the city of San Francisco who have a dual or triple diagnosis. So working with really low functioning folks in the community.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Delia. Okay, so our next bio. Eric, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, I'd love to. Well, thanks for having me. My name is Eric Young, and I'm a native of San Francisco, California. I grew up in a neighborhood called Bayview Hunters Point. For those of you familiar with San Francisco, it is a pretty low-income area. And so I grew up with around a lot of people with chronic illnesses. I wanted to be a doctor for most of my life. I wanted to be the one treating patients and helping them manage their chronic illnesses, obesity, asthma, diabetes. As I grew older and went through college, I started shadowing doctors and whatnot and getting more exposure to the medical field. But as I got more exposure, I realized two things. One is that I didn't care as much about the science of medicine as I did the impact. And number two is that as a doctor, I would only be seeing patients on a one-on-one basis, individuals, when I really wanted to make like a systematic change. So I actually decided to go the MPH MBA route here at Johns Hopkins. After working at Stanford, and I kind of jumped ahead there, but I worked at Stanford and I used to do research with wearable devices that focused on predicting and preventing chronic diseases from arising. And I thought, oh, wow, this is a really cool avenue. So I decided to do a MPH and MBA here at Johns Hopkins to change the way that we implement these new technologies, and also to change the way that we structure how we pay doctors, how we do clinic visits, etc., in the hope that we can make patient care better.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric, for sharing. Um,
My pleasure.
Michael, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. So I think that I got interested in doing social work because I grew up feeling very frustrated with the way that systems work and their impacts on marginalized people, especially people of color, low income people, immigrants, um, young people, and I I was also very interested in psychology, um, but I didn't really know how to apply that on a systems level, or in a way that I could impact individuals, families, and communities. Um, and I had the privilege of observing um, Delia go through her program and learning more about social work. And that's kind of what pushed me towards doing an MSW of my own. Prior to that, after graduating from UC Santa Cruz, though, I received my bachelor's in cognitive science, um, and I moved to Oakland, where I did a lot of like mentoring and restorative justice work, which basically is kind of practicing principles that are kind of that belong to primarily to indigenous communities, and finding ways to incorporate problem solving and decision making principles that indigenous communities use into systems like Western systems, like the education institutions of education, as well as child welfare. And I got really passionate about restorative justice work from seeing the impact that it had on reducing suspension rates at the school that I was working at, and increasing attendance as well to school. And from there, I moved on to being a health educator, a community health educator for La Clínica de la Raza, which is a community health clinic in Oakland, and I ran youth groups there. And after that is when I attended UC Berkeley for my master's in social welfare. And while I was there, I was exposed to clinical internships, work that is similar to the work that Delia does, of kind of doing long-term care in therapy with using therapeutic interventions with one-on-one patients. But I was a Title IV-E student, which I can go into a little bit more later on, which basically means that I accepted a scholarship that paid for my education, and therefore I committed to working for child welfare services for 2 years after graduating from my master's program. Slightly different focus in terms of how to practice social work. And basically, what I'm doing now is I'm working with children and youth who are living in extended foster care, and a lot of them live on their own or they live in group homes. And I'm working with them to figure out who their support networks are and who they could possibly find permanency with. And for older youth, for example, transitional age youth, I'm working with them to build their independent living skills, making sure they have all the resources that they need to basically live on their own, live healthy lives, possibly raise children of their own. So that's basically what I'm focusing my social work in nowadays. I work in a unit called Permanent Youth Connections. That's basically my story.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Michael. So now we're just gonna go and do like the regular panel with the preset questions that we have. So the first question, and like this is anyone can answer. What were some factors that made you decide on the specific program that you did?
So I can jump in. So, like I mentioned earlier, after graduating from UC Santa Cruz, I worked for 3 years. And so during those 3 years, I was a health educator also, but I worked with the Burcio Vasquez Health Center in the Hayward area, which is just south of Oakland, about 20 minutes south of Oakland. Wait, south, north, south. And so in that capacity, I was doing a lot of short-term linkage, like short-term care where I was linking youth to more long-term mental health services. And I noticed a gap in culturally relevant, culturally responsive care within the Latino population. So students are being referred to long-term services, but then were coming back to me and saying, you know what, this therapist doesn't talk to me the way you talk to me, or when I tell them about my family, they don't get what I'm saying to them. And so that to me was the primary motivation for them going back to school and being one of those providers that could potentially provide a more culturally responsive form of treatment. And so because I had already been in Hayward, that was part of my motivation for then going to CSU East Bay. So the university is within the city of Hayward. It's actually just 10 minutes away from the clinic where I was working. And, you know, commuting was a big factor for me. So I was living in Oakland. I wasn't in a place where I could relocate and sort of start all over financially. That just wasn't an option for me. And I had also been, you know, a student at a UC for 4 years prior to this. And so I knew what the cost of living, or I'm sorry, I knew what the cost of attendance was at a UC. And I also wasn't in a position after having done 4 years there to then bear the burden of another 2 years of that kind of cost of attendance. And so finances were a big part of my motivation for them going to a CSU as well. And then the third thing that I took into consideration was that the program that I chose has a very particular curriculum that's all centered around critical race theory, which again was one of my motivations for going into this work. And I felt like that was a really great opportunity for me to learn from professors who looked like me, who knew the community that I had been working in for 3 years, and that the curriculum was going to reflect what I really wanted to do after graduating. I did apply to other programs. So I also applied to San Jose State and to San Francisco State's MFT program. And, you know, I ended up settling on East Bay for all the reasons that I gave. And I was really, really happy to have done a CSU. So financially, I can honestly say that I didn't have to take on as many loans, and I'm in a better position when it comes to like having to repay all of that back. So that's a little bit about my story.
Thanks. Thank you, Delia. If anyone else wants to share, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I can share. So similar to Delia, I also received a scholarship to Johns Hopkins, and that played a big role in my decision. I chose to do an MPH MBA program because I wanted, like I said, I wanted to make a change on systems level. And I realized that I wouldn't be able to do that without understanding how to deal with the financials. I was originally only an MPH student, but I'd read about the MBA program here at Hopkins, and I gave them a call. I spoke to them about what the program entailed. I knew that Hopkins was one of like the leading healthcare brands in the world, so I knew that their MBA would be healthcare focused, and it was. But I was always cautious about MBAs because, you know, with my personality, I aim to, you know, do good more than I am to make a profit. And I didn't want a program that would make me someone more profit driven. And when I spoke to Hopkins about it, they said, no, this is a new type of MBA program that we created about 10 years ago. We are looking for people like you that want to make a change more than, you know, just focusing on the bottom line. And with that, I decided that this was going to be the program for me if I was ever going to do it.
Okay. Thank you for sharing, Eric. Michael, would you want to share? It's okay if you don't.
Hey there. So, yeah, I had a similar route as both of the folks that just spoke. So I studied at University of California, Santa Cruz for 4 years, and I also accrued a lot of debt while I was there. And from there, I needed to take some time for myself. I think after graduating, my undergrad experience was very difficult. I didn't feel like I had a lot of direction while I was in my undergrad, and so when I finally graduated in 2013, I definitely felt like I needed time for myself to kind of like recalibrate. Um, and so that's when I started taking time to just work instead of pursuing a graduate degree immediately afterward. So that's why I started working, and I worked for several years, like Delia did, and I kind of elaborated on earlier. Um, and then, like I mentioned earlier, I had the privilege of observing what Delia was doing in her master's program, and that got me thinking that I think that would be really similar from in terms of my interests as well. And so that's when I decided to apply, and I also applied locally. Um, I think that I wasn't ready to uproot myself. I felt very comfortable living in the Bay Area by that point, and I also felt pretty attached to the community, especially the community of Alameda County of Oakland. And so that's why I applied to Bay Area programs. I also applied to CSU East Bay. I applied to San Francisco State, and I applied to UC Berkeley. And I also applied for San Francisco State's clinical clinical rehabilitation mental health counseling program. So I was looking specifically into scholarship programs because of the amount of debt that I had accrued in my first 4 years of undergrad. And that was, I believe it was a $9,500 scholarship per year, which I would pay off as in a commitment of working in rehabilitation counseling after graduating. So I actually was thinking about accepting that scholarship until I learned that I had received the Title IV-E scholarship from UC Berkeley, which was a larger scholarship. That's an $18,000 scholarship per year. And again, you pay that back as a commitment of working for 2 years. Basically 2 years of accepting the scholarship and 2 years of paying it back. So I went with that one. And I was also very excited about the idea of attending UC Berkeley. That was a big part of the reason why I decided on it too. It was a school that I wanted to attend since I was younger too. So I saw it as my opportunity to do that. One other reason why I decided on UC Berkeley was because I attended information sessions, which I would highly recommend everybody who's interested in graduate programs to attend information sessions at the schools that you're thinking about applying to. Even if you can't attend an out-of-state one, for example, if maybe you could attend a webinar or something that they offer for folks to just kind of get a sense of their program. For me, that was the biggest selling point. Was that I attended UC Berkeley's information set. I attended all of them, but I was particularly impressed by the one that I saw at UC Berkeley, which is also why I decided on that program as well. So the information session was a big one for me to get a sense of who the staff were and what the vibe was at the school and kind of what was the philosophy that the school was going by. So that was probably one of the biggest deciding factors for me in my decision process.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing. So the next question that we're going to move on to is who and how did you ask for letters of recommendation and how many did you need for your program?
I can start.
So,
Oh, would you?
no, go ahead.
Thank you. So I needed 3 letters of recommendation for my program, and a lesson I learned after trying for medical school is that these letters of recommendation you should think about as evidence of the narrative that you're trying to make. So the first time I ever asked for letters of recommendation, I was just asking people with the most, how should I say, good titles, most impressive titles that I could find, so like professors or like doctors or whatever. But the second time I went about this, and this is for the current program that I'm in, I started asking mentors that knew me well, and I started asking professors that could speak to my abilities. I thought a lot about what type of image that I wanted to craft for myself, like what value did I bring? And then I had long discussions with my letter of recommendation writers. I asked them, would they be comfortable, first of all, writing one for me? And if they said yes, then we would talk more about what image I wanted to craft, what did I want them to say about me, and would they be comfortable saying it?
Great. Anyone else want to talk?
Yeah, so I ended up getting 4 letters of recommendation, and each program that I applied to actually only needed 2 of them. And so what I ended up doing was sort of taking a step back, and much like Eric, right? Like he just mentioned, I was also really strategic about who I asked. So for me, during my undergrad experience, I didn't feel like I walked away with a super strong GPA. And it's not just paranoia. Like, I legitimately really did not have the strongest GPA. And so I thought about, what were the classes that I was really passionate about, and in what spaces did I feel really comfortable, and I was able to really show my advocacy and my public speaking skills, and really my passion for working with the communities that I, was trying to work with. So I ended up choosing one of my professors from UC Santa Cruz, who I did my senior seminar with. And, that was a smaller class. I really had an opportunity to speak to her more. And she was a TA at the time. She eventually became a professor. And so when I reached out to her, I learned that she wasn't even teaching at UC Santa Cruz anymore, which was a real bummer. But instead, what I did was I looked her up on, I just Googled her, and I realized she was working at University of Washington. And I sent her an email just on a total whim, not expecting any response. And she actually responded within 2 days. And, she remembered me, and she was more than happy to provide me the letter. All she asked was that I continue to reach out to her from the time that I asked for it until a week before it was due. So she was like, don't be shy. Please email me and just remind me that you need this letter and when you need it by. I did tell her just a little blurb in an email of why I was choosing the programs that I was applying for, what my motivation was. So kind of to also give her an idea of what I was hoping that she would include in my letter. And that wasn't too long. It was pretty brief. And I think by that point, I had also started to work on my personal statement. So some of it was just bits and pieces of that. And then the other 3 letters that I got were actually from employers and people who had seen my work with youth one-on-one when I was a health educator. So 2 of those letters were also from therapists. So I had worked very, very closely to 2 of them. And they were more than happy to provide me the letters. As healthcare or mental health professionals themselves, they felt like I really had embodied a lot of the values of this field, and so they were able to really speak to that. And the 4th letter that I got was actually from a staff person at the school that I worked. And so she was able to speak to my advocacy within this larger school system, as well as my professional ability to communicate with other staff people. And so once I spoke to each of them, then I looked at the applications, and I tried to be strategic about which letters I was going to include in each of my applications. So for example, San Francisco State had also requested GRE scores, and so my GRE score was very strong. So I included sort of the 2 mental health people that I had asked for a letter for. And then for East Bay, I included the letter for my professor as well as one of the mental health professionals, because East Bay had requested a letter from a previous professor. And also because I knew that application wasn't going to have this test score attached to it. So I really wanted my letters to be as strong as possible, and speak to different parts of who I am. And yeah, I mean, the letters of rec were really nerve-wracking, but it totally worked out. And even the one that I didn't expect to get, I was able to get. So that was my process for letters of recommendation.
Awesome, thank you. Any more questions before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I'll speak.
Okay.
So I think that if there's one piece of advice that I could offer folks who are applying, it's to try to get those letters of recommendation from your professors as early as possible after you graduate. I say that because I didn't do that. I waited really long to reach out, and because of that, and I think that a lot of that had to do with my anxiety of reaching out, because I felt pretty self-conscious about my performance in undergraduate, even though I didn't necessarily, I mean, I did well enough to graduate, but I think that, like I said, my undergrad experience was difficult, and I think I experimented with different majors. For example, I tried biology before I did cognitive science, and that brought my GPA down significantly. And I also had a lot of trouble during undergrad, like building connections with professors and feeling comfortable enough to approach them. And so I think I felt really self-conscious about reaching out, because I just kind of felt like it wasn't going to be very productive for me, like they weren't going to remember me. And so it took me a really long time to reach out. Again, it took me several years basically after I graduated. And during my time, actually, before I graduated, I was able to get a research position, excuse me, with the psychology department. And I had developed a pretty strong relationship, or so I thought, with the professor. And I was just kind of counting on, like, you know what, I got that letter. But after reaching out to that professor several times, and I never actually got a response from him. And so I think that was kind of like a learning experience for me that I would like to share with others, is that don't put all your eggs in one basket. Definitely try to spread that out as much as you can. And, I think that you'll be pleasantly surprised, because I was also pleasantly surprised. And there was one other professor. So there were basically two that I thought maybe I'd have a shot with. And the one that I thought was a sure shot was not one at all. And the other one that I thought might work for me, my nightmare was realized with, in terms of I was always really anxious about reaching out, because I was really afraid of somebody telling me that they didn't remember me. I was more scared of that than them not responding at all, which is what happened with the other guy. But this other professor, she did respond to me, and she asked me why she should write this letter for me. She said, I think she said that she did remember me, but she hasn't been in contact with me. All legitimate, very legitimate concerns that she had, that I hadn't reached out before. And so, and I responded to her, and I said, I acknowledged all of that. And I was a little vulnerable with her, and I told her, I'm just, I've been anxious about this process. And I thought that maybe she would be a good person, because I actually ended up tutoring for the class that she taught. So I did work pretty closely with her as well too. And after I responded to her, and I told her, well, this was kind of what my thought process was, and I advocated for myself, she said, okay, I will write your letter. And she wrote me a very strong letter. And that was the letter that I think that I needed one required letter from a professor for, at least for UC Berkeley. And I used her letter for that. And I was very thankful that she wrote that letter. And I think she wrote a pretty strong letter for me. And all that to say that we all experience the anxieties of reaching out, but I would highly encourage you to not let those anxieties let you just put it off, because putting it off could make the outcome more difficult for you. And if you do reach out to somebody, and the worst that they can tell you is no, and you can either respond by saying, okay, I'll try with someone else, or you can advocate for yourself like I did, and you might have a good outcome with that. But if you want to avoid that as much as possible, put your eggs in multiple baskets, and reach out as early as you can, and give them as much time as reasonably possible for them, because you don't want to be rushing them to write a letter for you. You want to give them at least, I gave my recommenders about a month and a half to write the letter. And I checked in on them periodically through that time, and I let them know that I could support them, but I didn't want to bug them either or bother them. And also, this is optional, I sent them all gift cards after I received letters from them to show them my appreciation. So those are just little things that, little nuggets that I think could be helpful to take away from.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you all for sharing. So now, instead of doing the other questions that we had laid out, we actually have a couple of questions from people who are here. So here's the first question that we have.
Okay, so my question is, how did you go about being able to afford graduate school? Did you go into it being like, I'm going to take gap years and try to save up as much money as possible? Did you try to find scholarships or take out loans? And then while in grad school, how did you support yourself?
So, I actually did a couple of scholarships while I was in grad school. I got a stipend through the city of San Francisco through DPH, Department of Public Health. And I did have to apply for that. That was for $5,000. I also, when I got my financial aid package, I think one thing that I didn't realize was that, you know, the loans are very different from grad school than they are for undergrad, as are like grants. So when I was in doing my undergrad degree, every time I got a financial aid package, yeah, I got the loans, but then I also was given grants, right? So that's just like money that I didn't have to pay back. And I didn't get any of that for grad school. And I don't know what other people's experience is, but I have heard from many people that that was their experience as well. So what I did was I really sat down and I looked at the numbers and what was how could I cut expenses in a way where I was still able to meet my basic needs without having to take out the maximum amount of loans. And so what that ended up looking like was around, I don't even want to throw numbers out there because they're not going to be accurate, but you know, I did end up taking out loans. And then the scholarships helped me with my cost of living, so paying my rent and food and things like that. And I think Michael can speak to this a little bit more, but as students who are working full time, if you're able to get work study, you're eligible for food stamps and public assistance. And so that's another way to kind of balance out the cost of living. But it was really difficult. I mean, that was the very first conversation that I had to have with myself that required me to be super honest about, okay, what is doable, what is not doable. Sure, this program might look great, but maybe I can't afford that. So that's also why I chose CSU East Bay, was because the cost of attendance is like $8,000 just, you know, and that's everything. And then most of what I ended up taking money out for was also cost of living stuff. And the 3 years that I worked, I was able to save up some money, but that didn't get me through the 2 years of grad school. So a very eclectic approach. I kind of pulled from everywhere that I could, and even then I took out loans. So that was my experience.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to share? Okay, so then.
Oh, I can share.
Oh, okay, go.
Sorry.
You're okay.
Yeah, I also relied heavily on scholarships, as I mentioned earlier. And so I didn't really plan on, or rather, yeah, my priority of pursuing grad school was to find an affordable option for myself. I didn't see it happening any other way. And so I did work for 3 years in between undergrad and graduate, but honestly, I have no idea how people are actually able to work and, let's say, live on their own and save up money to pay for grad school. That's pretty amazing to me. Any savings that I had went away pretty quickly. And I didn't and I mean, by pretty quickly I mean like my savings from working full time for 3 years, I think I spent them in maybe the first 2 months of graduate school. And not putting anything towards tuition or anything like that, just my own living expenses. And that was with a scholarship. The Bay Area is an extremely expensive place to live. And so I was relying heavily on that scholarship that I mentioned, the Title IV-E scholarship. And right now might be a good time to mention that at least at UC Berkeley, and I'm pretty sure that this applies to a few other MSW programs as well, that there are state-funded scholarships for folks who want to pursue MSWs. One is the Title IV-E, which is not just exclusive to UC Berkeley. It's most state-funded MSW programs in California. There's also an integrated behavioral health stipend. I believe that UC Berkeley also offers state-funded Latinx student identifying scholarship. And those three are mutually exclusive, meaning that if you were to accept one, you cannot qualify for the other. So that's kind of something important to know. The integrated behavioral health stipend, is geared towards students who want to work in the mental health field, kind of like what Delia is doing. And Title IV-E is more oriented towards child welfare. And the Latinx student scholarship is pretty self-explanatory. It's for students who identify as Latinx. And so these are state-sponsored scholarships, meaning that you can only accept one. And so I accepted the Title IV-E. And in addition to accepting the Title IV-E, I also did my research on other department scholarships. So basically, every graduate program should have at least some scholarships that are circulated through just your master's program too. And I had another one that was circulated through my program that I qualified for. It was a separate child welfare stipend. That was a smaller one. That one was for about $1,500. And so basically, I think it's really important to not limit your basically your search for financial options prior to getting into the program. That is a big part of it, but it should be ongoing through your time in the program as well. Do your research and advocate for yourself about the awards and scholarships that are available just through your program, as well as those that are state sponsored. And I know that UC Berkeley also offers kind of like a TA position. It's called a GSI position, where you're basically agreeing to do grading or assist in teaching for a class, and then some of your fees are basically, I can't remember the word, but they're basically your fees are cut. A portion of your fees are cut, and you receive basically like a wage from doing that work as well. So there's basically like these work study opportunities too that you can find in your program. These are available through UCs, and I'm pretty sure they're available through like private school master's programs as well. I'm not certain of if those kinds of teaching opportunities are available through CSU programs. Many CSU programs have those departmental scholarships that I talked about earlier, though. And I know CSU East Bay, for example, also has Title IV-E opportunities as well as integrated behavioral health stipend. And like Delia mentioned, I also pursued funding, or not funding, but aid, public aid, right? So I did receive CalFresh and Medi-Cal health insurance. And these are options that are available to any full-time student. So definitely pursue that if you need that as well.
I want to add on to what Michael said about advocating for yourself. I think that's really important. So my three primary sources of funding that I got were that I took 3 years for a gap year and saved up living at home. I was lucky enough to have some family support, and the main source of funding for me is my scholarship. And the only reason that I was able to go to Hopkins, which is fairly expensive, is because of that scholarship. Baltimore is cheaper than the Bay Area, so that also helped out. But what I did was I had gotten accepted to 2 other programs, and I told Hopkins, like, I really wanted to come to you. However, you guys are clearly more expensive than the other ones, which are 2 UCs. The benefits of these programs of some private schools is that they have, larger endowments, and they're a little bit more likely to spend on scholarships if their students seem worth it. So this is your chance where you can advocate for yourself, defend why you think they should spend scholarship money on you. And even though the sticker price may seem high, it's also very possible to negotiate it down.
Yeah, he negotiated. Turn the microphone on.
Okay, so yeah, thank you. So okay, so we have a follow-up question. Just how do you go about like negotiating it? Do you like send like emails or what do you do?
Yeah, so MBA trick. Anytime that you need to have a hard conversation with someone, do it in person or the closest thing you can get to in person. What I did was I called their admissions office several times, and I formed a pretty good relationship with their program manager. And I was very honest about, why I wanted to come to Hopkins and what was standing in the way. When I say negotiate, it's trying to find like a win-win situation for all parties involved. I don't mean like you're trying to beat the other party. You're trying to let them understand, like, if you want me as your student, and here's why I think what I bring to the table, then here's where you have to meet me in. And, it's important if you can give them a number, great. Or if you just say, this is what my competing offer is. It's kind of like negotiating for a job salary.
Mm-hmm.
This is what my competing offer is. And, I would, if you can give this assurance, it also helps. But if you can meet me at this number, like, I can give you my word, I will attend your school. Because for a lot of these schools, there's also, statistics that they care about, like how many students are admitted and how many students actually get in, kind of the background stuff. So it's to their interests to have you enroll as well. Just know that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we're heading on just concluding the workshop. So do you all have some just final words for anyone who is planning on applying for grad schools or currently in the process of doing that right now?
I can say my last words. I think that the most important thing to factor into your decision-making process is really figuring out what your own needs are and why, and really figuring out, okay, what am I going to need to feel supported through this program? Because graduate programs, whether they're 2-year programs, whether they're 3-year or 4-year or 5-year programs, they are grueling and they can be very isolating. And if you don't have a regiment of self-care and a community around you that's willing to support you, it can be very difficult to sustain the lifestyle that a graduate program expects of you. So I would really encourage anybody who's looking into programs to think about, okay, not just the prestige of the school. So not just what you think the school might represent in terms of its rankings or those types of things. Really think about, really take a holistic approach to understanding geographically, where should I be at, right? Like, in what part of the world am I going to be the happiest? Do I have a support network in this area? Financially, how am I going to pay for this? And also, what is my vision for pursuing a graduate education? What do I really plan to get out? What do I wish to get out of this? What is the vision for the work that I want to do? Not just like what I'm passionate about, but what kind of impact do I want to leave at this institution? But moving forward, what kind of impact do I want to leave on my community? Why am I pursuing this in the first place? Really reflecting on those questions for yourself. I will be the first person to tell you that prestige was a big factor in my decision-making process. And that is not the, I think that what we come to realize is that every program has its pros and every program has its flaws too. And rankings, a lot of the time what they come down to are how rich are the alumni that are coming out of there and how much are they willing to donate back to that university after they graduate. That's what a lot of the rankings are determined by. Yeah, some of it has to do with the research that's coming out of that program too, but a lot of it has to do with where the money's flowing to. And that doesn't necessarily speak to the quality of the education that you're going to receive there. It doesn't necessarily speak to the type of work you might be doing afterward. It doesn't speak to the type of people you might be meeting. It speaks more so to a lot of the things that these systems that we are all, I mean, you know, like, for example, I assume that all of the folks who are in this group, you know, we're all pursuing some form of social justice work. And institutions, a lot of the time, can work counterproductively to the work that we want to do. And we always have to go into it with remembering what is the pursuit that we're actively working towards. What is the vision that we have and the philosophy that we have? And how can we bring that into that institution and make that institution better and hold it accountable for what it's supposed to represent for our communities?
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I 100% agree with what Michael said. I think it's very important to understand what you want and not just look at the prestige of an institution. Think about what you want to do with the degree when you come out. Sometimes, especially with some graduate degrees where it's very broad, it's very easy to get distracted by different options, and then you kind of lose track of where you're going to be. Some tip I do want to give is also look at your personal statement and make sure you write a very honest one, an authentic one, because it's going to help you when you actually get into grad school to stay on course and remind yourself in those hard moments, like, why am I here?
Thank you. Delia, do you want to add anything before we go?
Yeah. So whenever it is that folks decide that they are going to begin the process of searching for grad school, pursuing a graduate degree, don't be afraid to apply to more than one program at a time. And maybe part of that means applying to that program that feels really prestigious, that you've always been thinking of, that you just would love to be at, without maybe holding yourself back and limiting yourself based on those internal thoughts and fears that we have around our worthiness to be in those schools, or whether or not our GPAs are strong enough. I think there's nothing, it doesn't hurt to just apply and try and just see what happens. That's one. And then the other thing too is that if you're applying to more than one program, then you can apply to those programs that maybe are a bit cheaper, and in the process of them seeing whether you're accepted or not, you can continue to do research and reach out to students who have actually been in those programs. I know that was a really big factor for me as well, because the program itself is going to put out a very manicured version of what they do and how they do it, but it's really the students who are in those programs that can more accurately tell you what it's like to sit in those classrooms, and what the curriculum is like, and what the professors are like. And sometimes that's not one of those prestigious programs. So again, being someone who went to CSU East Bay, I really enjoyed my experience. I wasn't as stressed about money as maybe some of my peers who pursue degrees with like Berkeley. But I got an amazing education, and I walked away building real relationships with those professors, and a lot of them are now my colleagues, and I'm able to communicate with them and feel really comfortable with them, both in work, but also like as a mentorship relationship. And so just really apply to as many programs as you'd like and try to diversify the programs you apply to based on location, based on prestige, based on cost. Like really try to look at all of your options, and try to hit as many of those as you can. And so that requires some work. So months before I even submitted my first application, I was collecting information on these programs. And so be really patient with yourself when you're looking at schools. And if you don't apply right away, that's totally okay. You can apply the year after. But if it means, you being just more secure and more comfortable, that's really valuable. And so you will not be the oldest person in your program. I think age and pressure plays a big part in us really stressing ourselves out about this process. And ultimately what matters is that you get your degree, not when you get your degree. And I really truly believe that. And so good luck to everybody, and it will be okay, and it's not as bad as you think it is, but for a minute there it's going to feel terrible. But once you get past that feeling, like it really is, it all works itself out, and it's life changing for sure.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for your words. They were all super inspirational. You've all been so wonderful, and I know that everyone's going to really appreciate your honest responses. So I'm going to end the call, the meeting. So thank you for the person who attended and my colleague here with me who asked the question. But thank you so much for everything. That was really wonderful. I would be clapping for you right now.
Thanks for putting this together, Gotti.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, great job. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Good job.
Thank you. So I'm just gonna cut this now, and I'm gonna be posting it on hopefully YouTube, and then everyone who wasn't able to attend can see it. But yeah, thank you so much, and have a great rest of the night, everybody.